This is week 190 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. Two steps forward and one step back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held another civil face-to-face with U.S. President Donald Trump, their sixth in-person meeting this year. But once again, Russian President Vladimir Putin has done his best to undermine it and continue stalling the peace process. In a call on Thursday, the eve of Trump and Zelensky's scheduled meeting on Friday, Putin cautioned Trump against supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, arguing that such a transfer would not change the battlefield situation, but would significantly strain U.S. and Russia relations. The two agreed to meet face-to-face in Budapest in the near future, which analysts characterized as yet another stalling attempt by Russia. Just as Kyiv mounted pressure for more decisive U.S. support, the Kremlin seemed to throttle the momentum. Many had feared that this call with Putin would interfere with Trump's amenability towards Ukraine, and they were right. When Zelensky and Trump finally met on Friday, the moment indeed failed to yield the breakthrough that Kyiv had hoped for. Trump publicly hesitated. While he acknowledged recent discussions about Tomahawk deliveries for Ukraine, he also waffled on the matter, saying that the U.S. needs to maintain its own stockpiles. On Friday, Trump appeared more focused on the upcoming summit with Putin in Budapest, which effectively turned the attention away from Zelensky's agenda. In a repeating pattern, as soon as the U.S. appears ready to make a decisive move, whether in the form of arm transfers or sanctions, Moscow moves to reintroduce dialogue as a circuit breaker. So, what can I say? It feels like we go through this on a monthly basis. Trump threatens Russia with a red line. Russia pushes the envelope into the 11th hour. And then Putin reaches out with some crumbs of friendliness that make Trump renegotiate his deadlines and his boundaries. It's a limbo that won't end until Trump runs out of patience with Putin for good. And Putin, for his part, seems particularly adept at buying more time and goodwill. So what can we expect from this meeting in Budapest? Well, at this point, nothing. Russia's MO is to stall. Trump's MO is to call himself a peacemaker without making peace. And Ukraine's MO is to keep fighting for its survival. Every single day. As Russia continues to launch waves of drones at Ukrainian cities on a daily basis, the Kyiv Independent spent time with an air defense group operating in eastern Kharkiv Oblast, which borders Russia and often faces these attacks before many other regions. So I'll hand it over to my colleague Francis to show you.
На нас іде.
So much of the news about Ukraine these days in international media is about the mass drone and missile strikes that occur on Ukrainian cities, civilian targets being hit basically on a daily basis, and Russia famously increasing the number of these Iranian-designed but now Russian-made Shahed or Garan drones. Tonight we're with a group of guys whose job every night is to be ready to try and shoot down these Shaheds on their way in to big cities like Kharkiv.
Голландський кулемет ФНАШ 7,62 на 51. Дальність стрільби ураження 2 кілометри. Ми кожен вечір пересуваємося по заданому району, вичисляємо шахедів і знищуємо по змозі. Знищили вже 5 шахедів. 3 шахеда доказаних, і 2 ми не знайшли уламки. Бачили, що впали, як горіли. Ну, в нас більше ніякого очікування нема, крім перемоги.
Ahead of a winter that could be as decisive on the energy front as it is on the battlefield for the fate of the war, every fire asset, from advanced technology like interceptor drones to simple machine gun setups like this, will be crucial for defending Ukraine's skies.
This past week saw an incident in Europe that calls to mind a Russian tactic of invasions past. A tactic that historically sets the stage for much larger conflict. So, in January of 2014, little green men appeared on the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Not extraterrestrials, but masked soldiers of unknown origin with no visible insignia, who moved in and blockaded the peninsula's airports and military bases. And within a few months, they'd been reinforced by more overtly marked Russian troops, as Crimea was subsumed under Moscow's control. Little green men were also spotted in the Donbas region that year, a prelude to Russia's invasion of eastern Ukraine. And in both cases, Moscow initially denied that these little green men were its own citizens, but then later admitted that the unknown soldiers were in fact Russian paratroopers, special forces, and mercenaries. This pattern of sending in unmarked troops gives Russia a degree of deniability as it sets the stage for invasion. Which is why it rattled Tallinn last week when 7 armed men with no insignia appeared on a patch of southeastern Estonian road that briefly cuts through Russian territory. Estonia temporarily closed the road as a precaution, and officials encouraged the public not to panic. In the week since the incident, NATO and Baltic leaders have taken pains to reassure the public that a handful of unmarked troops don't necessarily signal imminent invasion. Estonian officials said that the sighting marked an increase in activity, but wasn't so far out of the ordinary for the area, which is regularly patrolled by Russian border officials. At the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Slovenia this week, Secretary General Mark Rutte admitted that Russia should not be underestimated, but likewise not overestimated either, cautioning allies against alarmism while reaffirming the necessity of vigilance and preparedness. He added that the threat of hypothetical military operations should not overshadow the more immediate threat of hybrid operations, like cyber attacks and espionage, which Russia is already undertaking against Europe. Some officials took a more blunt approach. On Monday, the head of German intelligence warned that Russia was ready for a hot confrontation with Europe at any moment. U.S. Representative Don Bacon emphasized the need for heightened vigilance and described Vladimir Putin as a cornered rat. And midweek, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Europe must be on the lookout for another round of Russian mobilization, because such an unpopular move on Putin's part could mean that he was gearing up for a large-scale war with Europe. 2 British aircraft, in a mission that was supported by the U.S. Air Force, did a lap of the entire eastern flank last weekend, sending a message of alertness to Russia. So, I actually spoke to a former classmate who lives in Tallinn and asked him what the effect all of this is on the average Estonian. He said that the border incident was in the news for several days, but didn't cause as much worry as the Russian jets that violated Estonian airspace last month, echoing that it's not so far out of the ordinary to see Russians moving on that particular stretch of road. He also said that no one there really thinks that Russia will attack NATO while the war in Ukraine is ongoing. And although people are afraid of the US pulling out of the Baltics, There's hope that the strong presence in Poland and Trump's stated commitment to defending Finland will keep the region stable. But the bottom line is, throughout the last month, Russia has leveraged drone incursions, military exercises, and cryptic threats in ways that test NATO boundaries while maintaining an, albeit thin, level of deniability. Analysts have said that Russia is entering a Phase Zero campaign, one of shaping conflict before active military engagement. No one has the exact answer as to what the right level of concern should be, or what the next stage of escalation could look like. And there's certainly an argument to be made that Russia doesn't have the resources to go to war with all of NATO right now. But in this new reality, Europe simply can't afford not to start preparing for the worst-case scenario. Ukrainians know from experience that playing the will they, won't they game with Russia is far less useful than preparing. Because once little green men are joined by actual Russian troops, as has happened time and again, it's too late for carefully laid contingencies. The Kyiv Independent is a reader-funded news outlet, meaning that shows like this are only made possible by viewers like you. If you'd like to join our community of more than 20,000 members, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. Also, KI Insights, the analytical branch of the Kyiv Independent, invites you to an exclusive online briefing on October 23rd. The topic is, where are Ukraine's oligarchs now? Power, projects, and political futures. Explore how Ukraine's major oligarchs are reshaping their influence amid war, sanctions, and reforms. This event is for KI Insights subscribers only, but you can try KI Insights free for 1 month at insights.kyivindependent.com. On Tuesday, President Zelensky announced that Odesa Mayor Hennadiy Trukhanov would be stripped of his Ukrainian citizenship, effectively terminating his tenure as mayor. The Security Service of Ukraine simultaneously released what it claimed was a Russian passport in Trukhanov's name, asserting that he held dual Russian and Ukrainian nationality in violation of Ukrainian law. On the surface, this seems like a straightforward measure to root out Russian influence in wartime. But the story isn't as simple as it seems. Before we get into the details, it's important to understand who Trukhanov is beyond his official title. He's been the mayor of Odessa since 2014 and was re-elected twice, despite being involved in multiple scandals and accused in a corruption case. Allegations about Trukhanov's Russian citizenship have circulated for as long as he's been mayor. Multiple journalists, officials, and activists have accused him of being a Russian citizen, allegations that he has repeatedly denied, and which the Security Service of Ukraine had found no evidence of as of 2015. Many have also viewed Trukhanov as sympathetic to Russia, which is why, when Russia's full-scale invasion began in 2022, and it became clear that Odessa was one of its targets, there were serious concerns about the city's fate under his leadership. But none of this appeared to bother Zelensky's office until 2025. Following Zelensky's accusations, Trukhanov immediately claimed that the passport released by the SBU was fake, describing the move as a political purge under wartime cover. And investigative journalists who examined the document agreed that some things were seriously off about it. The passport number didn't line up with Russia's numbering system for the year that it was issued, and the date and office code appeared to correspond to an entirely different region than the one listed. One investigator noted that parts of the biographical data on the passport matched those of a different Russian citizen, not Trukhanov. Despite this pretty damning evidence that the passport wasn't valid in the case against Trukhanov, Zelensky's office did not retract or clarify its position, and no independent verification process has been announced. It's also notable that in ousting Trukhanov, allies of Zelensky were able to quickly move into positions of power in the Odesa region. So as a reminder, elections aren't held under martial law, so all new appointments come from the president, not from the public. The only positions the president can't fill under Ukrainian law, even in times of war, are mayors. But there's a way around that, establishing city military administrations, the head of which are appointed by the president. And we've actually seen this before in Kyiv, where the mayor, former boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, is a longtime opponent of Zelensky. And we're seeing it now in Odessa. The same day that he announced the revocation of Trukhanov's Ukrainian citizenship, Zelensky signed decrees establishing a new Odessa city military administration and appointing former governor and security official Serhiy Lysak as its head. So, why is all of this happening now? The stripping of Trukhanov's Ukrainian citizenship followed a devastating flood that hit Odessa in late September, killing 10 people and sparking criticism of the local authorities over the disaster's handling. Some see this as a perfect moment for Zelensky's office to move to tighten control over Odessa, among other key cities in Ukraine. With Trukhanov's tainted track record, the public reaction to Zelensky's move was mixed. On the one hand, many Ukrainians have long wanted to see Odessa's mayor under scrutiny, with his alleged involvement in corruption and connections to Russia properly investigated. But on the other hand, the case has raised concerns over Zelensky's selective justice, as this is not the first time that his administration has used citizenship revocation as a political instrument. Zelensky reserves the right to take away citizenship, but no clear public standards exist for how such cases are selected, reviewed, or appealed. Legal experts have called the episode emblematic of selective justice, warning that executive decrees have replaced courts as the primary deciding factor of who counts as Ukrainian. The question, one said, is not whether the mayor is guilty, but whether the presidency should be the institution deciding guilt. Now, I know that many of our readers and viewers abroad admire Zelensky and see him as this Churchill-like figure, leading with authority for the greater good. But as a Ukrainian newsroom, we would be remiss not to hold our authorities accountable when their decisions are, at the very least, questionable. For our member question this week, we have this. How many children in Ukraine have been killed by Russia since Donald Trump was inaugurated in January with his promise of ending the war in 24 hours? And I'm going to take this one again. So the most important thing to establish when talking about this is that sources like UNICEF and Save the Children UK are in unilateral agreement that official numbers are underestimates, and that way more children have been killed and injured than official reports can account for. It's really hard to track these things in real time across the whole of Ukraine, including frontline regions and Russian-occupied territories. And the months between Trump's inauguration and now have seen a sharp increase in fatalities among Ukrainian children. In the first 3 months of Trump's second presidency, 222 children were killed or injured, which was 200% more than the previous 3 months. The summer's constant airstrike campaign against Ukrainian cities killed civilians across the country at an alarmingly steep rate, and July was actually the deadliest month for civilians of the entire full-scale invasion, with 286 people killed. So, to answer your question in the most straightforward official numbers, between January and August of this year, 55 children were confirmed to be killed by Russian attacks. More have been killed in the 2 months since, and again, these are underestimates. What's also not encapsulated by these numbers is the larger toll of the war on children, including the trauma from living in a war zone. In the immediate sense, there's interrupted education, loss of sleep, and in many cases, loss of home, family, friends, and stability during critical years of development. In the long-term sense, all of these can translate into severe PTSD, and even if the war were to end tomorrow, Ukraine's children will carry the effects for the rest of their lives. And for children in occupied territories, there's another horror to contend with: Russian brainwashing and militarization. Our War Crimes Investigation Unit has completed a new investigation into the systematic indoctrination of Ukrainian children in Russian-occupied territory, where they are conditioned through selective education and military training to serve as future soldiers in Vladimir Putin's regime. The investigation will be presented in the documentary The War They Play, premiering here on our YouTube channel next Thursday. Hit the bell below to be notified when the film comes out. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.